Ladies and gentlemen, even though our times today are, can I say, more than troubling, concerning, I'm one of those that have a kind of unshakable belief in humans, in the common sense, in the fact that at the end we will figure it out as mankind. And of course, talking about everything that goes on in the world right now, which is very concerning, we all know that. We're talking here on this channel about a microscopically small problem in that context that we're seeking to solve. Of course, as a clavichord player, an organist, pianoforte player, I'm part of this so-called historically informed performance practice, where the word informed is very important. We need to inform ourselves in order to go back into history and to figure out what the composers originally had in mind. That's fascinating. Many of you watching now, all of you watching right now, actually, I don't know any musician, any musicologist, of course not, but also not any music lover, listener, the audience that doesn't find it fascinating just to imagine how what Beethoven thought like seconds before he wrote down the first notes of what would become his Fifth Symphony. What did he hear in his mind? It's that what we're looking for. And of course, in the context of the entire world, this is microscopically small, harmless, because you can play a piece of music as you wish. But you know, music is emotion, and therefore changing something, which we're focusing here like quite a lot recently, last years, writing a book about that, making recordings, launching a metronome database soon. Tempo reconstruction, thinking about what possibly could have these metronome marks meant in the days of Beethoven, the days of Chopin, the days of Schumann, Mendelssohn, you name it. When you come to the conclusion that there is only one solution, you take the back and forth of the metronome, just like a pendulum, to represent that note value in the metronome marks. Well, that has a major consequence. Looking back over our shoulders, back into history, you will see that at least for 1 century, people are trying to reach those metronome marks given by the 19th century composers in general. And we don't succeed. It's impossible. It turns out to be beyond human capabilities. And we find all kinds of solutions, from broken metronomes to reading under the metronome weight, and all kinds of things that when you just think for 2 seconds straight, you figure it out. It cannot be the case, because if that were the case, well, then all the composers in the 19th century are either all these metronomes were broken in the same way, because guess what? All these metronome marks are in the same range. And so we figured that out. Once the book is published, you will see a list of all the sources. You will see also contextual evidence, a lot of contextual evidence from which there is only one solution. You can use the metronome in 2 ways. As we do today, what we call modern single beat reading. 1 tick represents the note value in the metronome mark. Or you do it in the whole beat way, the back and forth, as representing the metronome mark, the note value in the metronome mark, which is not so surprisingly strange. You just say, instead of 1, 2, 3, you say 1 and 2 and 3. In fact, that's how we learn the notes to our kids in music school still today. But music is emotion, and you all know for sure, if you're here longer here on this channel, that your servant sometimes has to take the heat. But I don't mind; it's all for the good cause. And again, we are focusing on this microscopic small thing in human society, which is music, and music is important. But within that little bubble, we're trying to figure out how that music was played before, and that we get a lot of resistance. Was to be expected. But times are changing, and we're going to have a look at an article published a year ago that was sent to me by one of my Patreons, and it made me happy. There are some good points in there, and we're going to read through that. It's not so long, and then discuss. Before I do that, if you're new here, please like and subscribe to the channel. I want to grow this channel to 100,000, which is really a stretch for a channel focusing on this very small, microscopic topic, yet very important. Changing the tempo changes everything in the piece of music, starting with the character of the piece. And isn't that really the most important thing? That's the message that the composer had for us in mind. But it is, of course, very important because by doing that, we change the entire music history of the last century. We changed the entire vision of how music was played in the 19th century. And I'm convinced this will set forth more and more. This little island is broadening, and I'm very happy to that. And secondly, before we dive into the article, go and check out our Patreon page. I love all my patrons. They make it possible for me to do this work for you. So there are podcasts, there are all kinds of stuff, recordings, we have updates, we are closer to the project. Anyways, link is in the description box. Thank you for checking it out. And now, without further ado, let's have a look at this article. The article is written by Tazio Aprile. I'm butchering probably his name. He's Italian, University of Pavia. And if we click on his name, he is an undergraduate student at the University of Pavia, active musician and musicology student. Now, Italian is one of the languages that I'm not so familiar in, so I asked just Google to translate that. So the links to the original, I will be putting them in the description box. If I forget to do that, which can happen, there is always Johan to rescue me, but you can just type in the title here and you will end up at ResearchGate, and there you can find the original article. So I didn't want to manipulate the text by translating it having it translated by Google. So this is very interesting. Remember, a few years back, and it's already 4-5 years back, it's unbelievable how fast the time goes. I mean, real time in our society goes in single beat for sure. It's like shocking to me, also working on the book really hard. We're going through the chapters again, finishing up the manuscript for publication, but it's like a shock to me when I see some online links that I checked, and of course you put like the date when you check the links, and I see sometimes 2020, 2021. So if you reach out to me, when is your book gonna be published? Like I hear you. I witnessed that like recently, more than I wish, like 4, 5, 6 years. It's unbelievable. So the series on the Hammerklavier Sonata, you can find them on the channel. I will, if I think about it, will link them also in the description box. They're very interesting. And we should also update that. That's for the minute. But the core essential information, of course, remains the same, because the Hammerklavier Sonata, written by Beethoven, for those of you not so familiar with that, the Opus 106, it's one of the most astonishing pieces of music ever written. But the Hammerklavier Sonata is, of course, a pivotal piece, and it's also symbolic because it's the only piano sonata that Beethoven himself metronomized. And these metronome marks, that shouldn't surprise us, are amongst the most controversial of the entire 19th century. Now, they should not be that, because the Hammerklavier Sonata's metronome marks are controversial because of the fact that we cannot play them. We cannot just replicate them. And even when people try to do that, generally the audience says like, but it doesn't make any sense. It's just like a basket of where you throw in all the notes, and then you just, it doesn't make any sense. But apart of all of that, it is super interesting what people have to say about it. And so let's go through the article. It's excellently written. It's very short. It opens actually the question to what could actually be the solution to that. And my work is mentioned again. Very happy for that. And very positively, I have to say. So this is going to be a very different video compared to, for instance, the last one that I made last week about the guy of the ultimate classical music guide, or the music professor. So let's go through that. The analysis of the metronome indications in Beethoven's Sonata Opus 106, the famous Hammerklavier, and their historical interpretation represents one of the crucial points for understanding the evolution of performance practice during the 19th century. Among the challenges that this sonata imposes on the performer, the management of the tempos indicated by Beethoven stands out as one of the most complex, raising debates among scholars and musicians. The technical difficulties are accompanied by equally demanding fidelity to the metronomic indications, which have long been the subject of discussion, fueling a constant search for a balance between virtuosity and respect for the composer's original intentions. A particularly insignificant case of historical interpretation is the performance of the Hammerklavier by Franz Liszt in 1836. By the way, many times you hear that this is the first performance of the Hammerklavier Sonata. That's actually not true. There were other performances as well. For instance, Karl Czerny, he played the Hammerklavier Sonata a few weeks after completion. It was a private gathering, I get it. So Franz Liszt, very symbolic, in Paris, he played the Hammerklavier Sonata, which was very important at the time because Beethoven was not forgotten, but was not that often played. We cannot imagine that today. But it's people like Franz Liszt, Moscheles, Clara Schumann, in a sense, that actually brought Beethoven more and more to the public. And so by playing the Hammerklavier Sonata in full, probably, according to Berlioz, Liszt made a huge statement. It was also for him a pivotal moment in his career. Anyways, which offers a precious starting point for reflecting on how the great performers of the past faced these difficulties. Well, that's true. Although there is no definitive evidence as to the exact speed adopted by Liszt, true, his approach to the sonata and contemporary testimonies offer important keys to understanding 19th century performance practice and how this related to metronomic indications. That's an excellent introduction. And why? Because it's a little case study. That's actually what the author is saying. This is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important one, because when we cannot fix that piece of the puzzle, when, in other words, this piece of the puzzle doesn't fit into our image, or use that image a lot of times, we try to reconstruct that painting and use a little piece of that painting or that puzzle painting or whatever you want to call it. And when it doesn't fit, well, then we have to search for like a way in order to make it fit. Like, in what kind of sense does that piece of puzzle fit into the image that we imagine the 19th century was? And you have actually two options. You have the single beat option in our case and the whole beat option. Those are two different paintings. And in many instances, you will see that in the single beat painting, those pieces of the puzzle do not make any sense. They don't have a place. In the whole beat board, everything gets a place very easily. And so that's one of the things that the introduction actually tells us, that it's just one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important one because it has the name Franz Liszt. You will see that Berlioz is added to the equation as well. And you have the Hammerklavier Sonata. So let's continue. And then you follows the table with the very strange translations by Google with the tempo indications by Beethoven. Translating these indications into practice, as soon as any performer sits down at the piano to study the Sonata Opus 106, the perception immediately emerges of how the tempo indications are extremely accelerated. So that's a bad translation by Google, probably, and the original says like, okay, when you sit down at the piano, you will be just shocked how fast it is. And by the way, this is shocking on itself, because most people talk about the first movement and never about the second movement or the third or the scheduled second movement and then the adagio. Adagio played always at least 20 to 25% slower. And then the tempo, of course, fluctuates throughout the entire thing. Then you have the fugue in 144 quarter note, which is pretty fast. And by the way, 144 quarter note is exactly the same tempo as, for instance, Karl Czerny gives, not exactly, Karl Czerny gives for the first invention by Bach. We talked about that a few weeks back. And in the past, 138 is what Czerny gives in the French edition. So there you see a correlation that doesn't make any sense. But 144 quarter note is pretty fast. But 138 for the first movement, you are playing then 9.6 notes a second, which is not problematic. 9.6 notes per second is what a top pianist today can do. Not, however, in a complex piece like the first movement of the Hammerklavier Sonata, but if I say to you that Karl Czerny's Opus 299, the Schule der Geläufigkeit, the School of Velocity, starts the first etude, the simple one in C major, with 14.4 notes per second, you start to wonder, like, why are people focusing on the Hammerklavier Sonata so much, while when they take a step back, they would see that there are major issues to be solved than the Hammerklavier Sonata. But anyways, that as a side note. So the speed of the prescribed tempos, immediately evident in the metronomic indications, is particularly demanding and requires a notable degree of virtuosity and precision of execution. Well, that's actually a kind of nice way to say, like, it's impossible. So I understand it's hard to say that, especially when you write an article, but it is in fact like it doesn't require a notable degree of virtuosity. It's like flat out above what everybody can do. And again, with the Hammerklavier Sonata, you can have a debate, but if that's already a debate, well, then we go one step further and we replace Beethoven Hammerklavier Sonata by Alcon studies, and then an end of discussion. Anyways, reading the critical literature left by the great performers of the past, one reads, I quote, "The speed indicated by Beethoven is so bold and intense that it is often difficult to find a balance between technical precision and interpretative authenticity." That's Schnabel, 1935. I'm going to come back on Schnabel later. And then another quote, "Beethoven imposes a notable challenge with his metronomic tempos. The allegro movement require a speed of execution that pushes the limit of the piano and the performer, putting technique and physical resistance to the test." That's Kempf in 1961. You have more quotes. The book will give more quotes than this, but I mean, it doesn't matter how many quotes you find, how many quotes you give. It's always the same thing. When people openly, and not to me, when people talk to me on my channel in the comment box, or they have an idea that I might read what I have to say, like the Hammerklavier, wow, that's not a problem, Wim, but of course not. We can all play that. It's all so simple. I just practice a little bit more. But when people write about it, like honestly from their experience, I mean, Schnabel was not an amateur. Kempf, I mean, we have more quotes, as I said. They all say the same, like it doesn't make any sense. Anyways, we continue. As one can easily imagine, this condition fuels the design of a revolutionary Beethoven, a milestone for the compositional practice of his descendants. Beethoven's metronomics for the Opus 106 are a testament to his revolutionary approach to tempo and structure. They not only challenge the technical limits of pianists, but also provoke a re-evaluation of interpretative norms. This is an important quote. I should have mentioned that. It's by 1992, so that's very recently. So this is actually given from the perspective, like, we just accept without a question that these metronomics are a single beat practice. They represent that. There is no other solution. And from that perspective, of course, we have no solution. That's actually what this quote is saying. They not only challenge the technical limits of pianists, again, that's weasel words for just say what it is. This goes beyond the limits of pianists, but also provoke a re-evaluation of interpretative norms. Of course, in 1992 and still today, musicologists would say, like, this really provoke a re-evaluation in favor of speed. That's why you hear today so many recordings, everybody actually, also in Baroque music, just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. Because guess what? We have to reach those metronomics, right? We are so truthful to the score, and therefore we do everything within our power, especially when you're a conductor or you are a teacher in a conservatory, to make others play like this. Right? It's untenable. I'm happy with this article because it shows that a little bit. And then he continues to talk about the Hammerklavier Sonata and Liszt. You can read that. Also, I mentioned this in my video. You can also watch that again. But Liszt played this Hammerklavier Sonata in Paris, and Berlioz was there. And he followed with the score. He said, Liszt performed Beethoven's great sonata, that sublime poem considered by almost all pianists to this day as a riddle of the Sphinx. Probably that's a bad translation. And so on and so on and so on and so on. And Liszt proved himself the pianist of the future. And Berlioz adds, No note was omitted, no note was added because I was following the score. That's important. I mean, in those days, we have to imagine, talking also about durations. You know, this document that was published a few years back, which everybody like keeps throwing at me or in online discussions like, yeah, this thing has been solved. We have durations. Even last week we had that guy from Dave from the Ultimate Musical Classical Guide, like, hey, we have durations. Hey, we know how it was played because we have the durations, right? We know that, right? I mean, I'm joking a little sarcastic also, but I mean, give me that little pleasure. Because what do we know? What do we know? Like what Berlioz here is writing is actually undermining everything that's in that document. All the things that point to Holbeat. I mean, in that document, there was those are never mentioned, of course, but they are. But Berlioz says no note was omitted, no note was added. That was happening all the times. Just read Berlioz's letters or his memoirs. They are absolutely fantastic to read. There's an English translation of his memoirs. It's very cheap. It's unbelievably beautiful printed. Just find it and read it. Berlioz had a magical pen, but he was actually condemning this practice of that time where people just were cutting parts out of movements of symphonies were never given and whole sonatas were never played. Like this was Liszt's performance was like a symbolic moment because he didn't leave out any note. Nothing was omitted. It was new. And Berlioz started that movement with others, and eventually that would lead into the end of the 19th century by following the complete score more and more and more and more. So when you're dealing with durations and timings, you have to be always aware like what was played, and oftentimes more than actually not. It was never mentioned. Remember, these people didn't listen 50 times or 50 million times even to CD recordings, so they knew the score better than the musicians almost. So that was all new music. So of course, it's difficult to establish whether Liszt actually respected the metronome tempos and so on and so on and so on. If we assume that Liszt followed the metronomic indications, the fundamental question is, how long did this performance of the Hammerklavier last? Having obtained this information, we could compare it to the duration of modern performances. Well, I would say I'm not totally agree with this because why would you need, that's also my major criticism of the durations report, why would you need durations timings when you have metronome marks? When you have the metronome marks and you still feel the need to have extra information added to the metronome marks in order to solve a problem, then my answer is when the metronome marks themselves are not enough to figure out the original tempo that the composer had in mind, when they cause problems, then your reading of the metronome marks is wrong because the metronome marks are designed. They were given in order to solve all the problems, in order to stop all the confusion. But when they do confuse you, when they actually pose problems so that you need to go to something else in order to give like an interpretation to metronome marks, well, then your interpretation of the metronome marks is wrong. So I'm not disregarding the interests of the interesting thing, the interesting perspective that durations can give, but you have to put it in the right context. And also that document, I'm not going too deep in that, has some major flaws. You have to first say like, hey, what is the problem that we want to solve? How do we want to solve that? And then when you go into the data of durations, you have to give criteria which data are worth actually exploring and why. That's like not so simple as just collecting and nitpicking like a few and then say like, see, this proves that performances in the 19th century are similar to ours, so case closed, Holbeat was not a thing. That's, of course, where do I start? By the way, we made it clear enough. You don't need the book anymore, actually, to know with the sources that I gave to you that music was sped up in the 19th century so much that when you would try and time travel to 1850, 1840 even, that the chances are really great that you would hear like similar tempos that we have today, maybe a little bit slower, but absolutely no representation of the original, because in that time span of 1820, 1840, there was an incredible increase of tempos, acceleration of tempos. Anyways, then follows the letter. For those of you remember that from my videos, October 1876, Liszt sent a letter to Karl Wittgenstein in which he said, like, she asked, like, how long does the piece last? And she asked about its duration. Before examining the answer to your question, I report the result of the analysis conducted by Wim Winters, that's me, in a study on the tempi of this sonata presented in the video Liszt's 1836 Hammerklavier's version, proving the impossible possible. Some demystifying facts published on YouTube on August 28, 2019. You can find that easily if I forget to put a link in the description box. Winters, based on the original metronomic indications, calculates a total duration of 32 minutes and 52 seconds, which is then basically the durations of the Hammerklavier Sonata if you play it in single beat. And the great thing is the Hammerklavier Sonata has only one repeat. That's the A section, the exposition. Underlying how it is impossible to find the duration of this magnitude in current performances, stating that, he's quoting me, the fastest performances exceed 40 minutes, and in most cases they're around 48 to 50 minutes. So then comes the letter, also quoted by me, which is given by Johann Sonnleitner also in the Wiener text of the Beethoven Opus 106. And there Liszt says that, let me quote here, the sonata consists of over 70 pages of music, if not more, and lasts about an hour. The two data are discrepant. The duration indicated by the virtuoso being from reading Liszt is almost double the duration calculated based on the original metronome indications, which is true, right? There you go, durations. How can this divergence be justified? Winters considers durations indicated by Liszt as significant. I do. Significant confirmation of the validity of the whole tempo theory he himself promoted. Well, it's not a theory, it's a practice. And it's not only me. But anyways, now you can say, like, yeah, I have double standards. Because one hand you say, like, hey, durations you shouldn't care. Because, listen, the metronome marks give all. But when the durations fall into your part of the equation, then you say, like, it's valid. No, I don't. The validation of Liszt's duration comes forth from the metronome marks in the sense that it's a real performance that he's talking about. And surprise, surprise, it's double of the calculated duration that follows from the calculated duration of the metronome marks, of course. And so, but I'm more than happy to give it away. Like to say, like, I don't care, which is true. It's a nice element that duration falls more or less aligns itself with the duration of the whole beat interpretation of the metronome marks, but I don't need it. Just you can have it. You can debunk that duration, whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that the metronome marks by Beethoven were given in the seclusion of his study room, with no pressure of an audience, with not an estimated duration, but by playing the piece. In fact, he was playing the piece and Karl was metronomizing. So there is no double standard here. But yeah, it is a nice element. Also as counter evidence to people say, like, there is absolutely no evidence, and the durations, they all point into the same. No, they don't. He considers it a crucial warning for contemporary performances, raising the fundamental question of their historical fidelity. That's correct. This element, regardless of the empirical validity of Winters' theory, highlights the need for critical reflection on the performance tempos adopted today. Well, that's actually what I want. Of course, we have to critically reassess everything, starting from the assumption that the letter in question, written 40 years after the described performance, may represent limits of reliability. An interpretative space opens up that requires a rigorous methodological approach. Well, that's true. So what he's saying, like, okay, we don't know if Liszt played like that in 1836. Well, no, but in 1876, there was actually what he thought about this. You have all these data, all these things, all these quotes, all these historical sources. You have to put them in the context of something, like not necessarily that proves that Liszt was doing that in 1836, although Berlioz following the score, and so on and so on. Berlioz also a big proponent from the metronome, and so on and so on and so on. You can create a three-dimensional context around this, but it's again not important. In the context of the metronome marks, there's only one solution, and Liszt actually here fits into that solution. Okay, then he continues like the possibility that such documents do not accurately reflect the original conditions of the performances requires researchers and performers to carefully examine historical sources while recognizing potential tempo and contextual distortions. Well, that's true, but you have to do it from a certain perspective. What people today are doing almost unanimously, without an exception, is say like, whole beat cannot be the truth. Single beat was the historical practice, and so we're going to look back onto history, to the historical facts, to the historical sources from the single beat lens. And when you read some sources talking about the metronome, even the Melzer directions, we talked about it recently again. When you see a sentence like, each single beat forms part of the intended time, you say, boom, proven, single beat was correct. Okay. Even though the Melzer directions do not say that, they say a single beat form part of the intended time, which is the complete opposite. But even when you say, okay, my case is closed, like, we have here a complete set of sources that prove single beat right. Yeah, but what do you buy with that? What do you buy with that? Go sit down, play the Hammerklavier Sonata, or play the Opus 299 by Czerny, the Schule der Glovkeit, School of Velocity number 1. I'm mentioning that piece for the simple reason that everybody can sight read that. You can experience that yourself, how impossible it is. And when you do realize that Czerny in his introduction actually says to the student, you practice this piece until you play it in the tempo that I've set. Well, that's almost 15 notes per second. Good luck with that. Nobody can do that. And if that's not enough, then we go to 16, 17, 18, 20 notes, you name it. Of course, not all pieces are 20 notes per second in single beat, but they exist and it's not just one piece. Anyways, examples such as this show show how adopting an analytical approach that takes into account both innovative theories and historical evidence is essential to approach a more authentic and nuanced understanding of the original compositional intentions. Winter's contribution shows how the question of reliability of historical testimonies invites an interdisciplinary dialogue involving musicologists, performers, and historians in order to build an interpretive framework that respects the complexity and richness of the historical musical context under examination. Only through a shared commitment to research and critical reflection will it be possible to elevate performance practice to new levels of depth and authenticity, paying homage to the legacy of great masters of such as Beethoven. What does emerge clearly, that's of course true, and this is a nice way if you are like an undergraduate musicologist to say like, hey, I want to research this further, I need some more people around me, because it is tricky. This requires courage, but this is a sign that the time is changing. What does emerge clearly from our analysis is that Hammerklavier Sonata, from being considered inaccessible, is playable, as demonstrated by Liszt's own practice and Berlioz's observations. The 19th century comments, which describe the work as incomprehensible and almost impossible to play, that's not correct. There is even Moschles, when he comments on the first movement being too fast, metronomized, he doesn't say it's too fast to play. He says it's too fast in correlation with the term and allegro. So it sounds like a presto when you play like that. He actually says the opposite. When you play it like that, when you play the 138 half note, it sounds like a presto. But guess what? It was originally a presto. Allegro assai. Beethoven scratched the assai, but left the metronome mark. He also was aware that when people would see assai, they would speed it up more than he wanted. But he wanted like a very, yeah, I would say from a whole beat perspective, a fast performance. Anyways, well, it ends here. In conclusion, a future exploration of Winter's theory could greatly enrich current research. I reserve the right to conduct this investigation at a later date with the aim of fully exploring its implication for historical performance practice. Well, I think once the book is published, people will have like a great tool. I hope that's the aim of the book, that the book will serve as a starting point for many more researchers. I just wanted to give you here as a final point of this video, here I mentioned that research before was published at the Staatliches Institut für Musikforschung in Germany. I don't know if it's still there. The link here is, you can just type in the title and you'll find it. It's on two websites. It's executed by Dr. Heinz von Lusch in collaboration with another university that did measurements. And then you see, like, guys, if I talk about the mystification of the problem, like, just see a document of 51 pages to explain not only the Hammerklavier Sonata, but to come to no results. They actually say, like, we don't know the solution. And for something that was given in the 19th century by Beethoven and others to end all the confusion, being the metronome marks, I mean, that people just step back a little bit from your work. Like Professor Dr. Heinz von Lusch, that sounds impressive, and probably it is a guy that has an impressive track record. But is it so hard? Yes, it's hard. It's hard, I know that. I'm not downplaying the guy. But to step back and say, like, hey, if we need two universities with all of these kind of statistical research, I don't even know if statistical, but like research, if you scroll further like this, to solve something of which we know as a fact that it was given by the composer as an evident tool for the musician, what are we missing? What are we missing? And I'm scrolling further because for those of you who are longer here, you will recognize these overviews because I've been using them. Here is the overview of the Hammerklavier Sonata, first movement. Not a single pianist that they measured, 45 names or so, reaches the 138. Schnabel at 131, but please go ahead and listen to that performance. It's a joke. It's a joke. Korschtik is fast, but if I'm not mistaken, Korschtik's Adagio is exactly whole beat. I mean, it's just not me who's saying that, but go ahead and go to Mr. Tadzio Aprile and just like type in the title, just read the article, download the article, give this, let's make this like 150 or 200 or 300 reads so that also his work gets a little bit more attention. I'm very happy with this. It shows that there is something moving, and right, I mean, I can say rightfully so, but it should happen. I have to honestly say that sometimes I'm sitting here or at my desk and I'm thinking like if I see a video of like the music professor, people that have like an influence of the guy of the Ultimate Classical Guide, of Dave, what was his name, Hurwich. I mean, I sometimes get discouraged because, like, again, what is so hard to understand? Hey, you have a responsibility because you have 50,000 people on your channel, so be careful with what you're saying. Think about this before you say something. But then pieces like this come and, yeah, this gives me hope. This gives me more than hope because that's a younger generation. And you can say whatever you want about young people, like, yeah, they lack the discipline and they're just spoiled with their phones and they're all... Yes, I don't know if that's true. Sometimes, yes, every generation has its own issues. We have 2 kids and the youngest, for sure. We need to pay attention to her. But they also think critically. They say, hey, you say that. Is that actually true? And now, this causes a lot of problems as well today and challenges because you cannot question everything. Like I said before, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. When there is a vaccine, I will take it. If the doctor says, I'll take it because I respect the knowledge of like researchers in this. But to be critical in a certain degree, not to question like everything on this planet, but to say like, hey, but if I activate 2 brain cells, I can actually think about this to be, that doesn't make any sense. You say that it's like that, but you cannot play it like that. And then I mean, that's what young people are doing. That's also the reason partly why Alberto knocked on my door, my partner for the symphonies here, and now he's recording all the Beethoven keyboard works, exactly because these people think. When I was in Amsterdam, of course, I had one of the best teachers ever. I could talk with him like that, and I was maybe a little bit of a different case because, yeah, with the piano class it was a little bit different. But people were more like they accepted the authority of the teacher. Like you said, I think it, and it's still today, but less and less. And in this case, like going back to the beginning of the video, we're not solving the world's problem of today. We don't. Though I think that Beethoven in whole beat would give a lot of comfort to many people because it's overwhelming. It's so overwhelming. But this microscopic small thing that we are doing, well, that starts to move. I'm very happy for that. I wanted to make this a 20-minute video, but like, I'm sorry. It was interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. If you're still here, leave it in the comments. I will give it a heart. Always appreciate that. Again, check out our Patreon page. Also, link to the recordings here. We will be launching the first shipment of the keyboard works. That will be around mid-May, 2025, June. Check it out. We will send out an email. Probably mentioned also, and we'll mention that also in one of my videos. But then you get like a discount as last time. If you want to be part of the first shipment, but check it out. You can also pre-sell it right now. Okay, that was it for today. Thank you for watching. We see each other very soon. Again, bye.